Welcome back to another Year 11 lesson on genetics, variation and evolution. So we've just done our antibiotic resistant bacteria. Let's move on to probably one of my favourite lessons of all, fossils. Well, a brief introduction. What is a fossil? Well, fossils are, there are many types, but basically the most common type of fossil are usually what we call body fossils. So they're the physical remains of an organism from millions of years ago that's formed through the process of mineralisation. So in order for mineralisation to occur, our organism needs to get buried in sediment, maybe in a river or a lake or in the ocean or something like that. And then layers and layers of sediment build up over the top of it. And the pressure from that sediment above causes minerals to form in the hard parts of an organism. So if this was me and it was my body, my hard parts would be my bones and my teeth. The soft parts of my body, my organs, my skin, etc., would actually decompose relatively rapidly by bacteria, but the hard parts would remain and could stand a chance of being mineralised. This explains why when we're looking at, say, dinosaur fossils, for example, we only know really much about them from their bones and their teeth. It's only very rarely do soft tissues get preserved. There's a couple of examples where we can get kind of soft tissue preservation of body fossils, and that would be in the case of things like amber, which can preserve things really quite spectacularly and wholly, including all their soft tissues. Ice, during the Ice Age, only between 100,000 and 10,000 years ago, we do get whole organisms preserved in ice, including soft tissues. I know of an example of a mammoth that was still chewing its food. The food it was chewing was still in its mouth when it was rapidly frozen in ice as it fell into a lake, and that was preserved, from 100,000 years ago. Quite remarkable. But the majority of our fossils are body fossils, and they tend to be from this mineralisation process. We can also get trace fossils. This is where the actual body of the organism isn't preserved, but its position in life is preserved. So the most obvious example is if you were walking along the beach, you would leave behind footprints. There's a chance that those footprints could get filled in by sediment and actually get preserved that way. That's an example of a trace fossil. Other examples are things like burrows, where roots were growing, all these kind of things. So these are the two main types of fossil, body fossils and trace fossils. But the next question is, well, what's this got to do with this topic? Well, fossils are a fantastic piece of evidence for evolution. And if you remember from our lesson last week, we learned that evolution is the process by which organisms change from simple to more complex forms over millions of years by the process of natural selection. So if species are changing over millions of years, we can't always observe that change. We have with bacteria, we can see them evolve because they reproduce so quickly, and we're looking at just quite simple changes. But if you're looking about how organisms have really radically changed from new species, we're just not going to see that in the time that we have available. So the fossil record provides us with these little snapshots in history where we can actually look at the bones and other body parts of organisms and see actually how species are changing, adapting to their environment. And we'll look at an example in a moment of horse evolution, and I'm going to put up a diagram to show you how the fossil record of the horses have shown us how they've evolved over time. So horses have been around, or these horse-like animals have been around for around about 60 million years, so quite a long time. They started off relatively small, probably sort of small dog-sized animals, and they lived in much warmer, wetter environments. So we've got fossils of an animal called Hyracotherium, and it was living in what is now Germany, and at that time, sort of around about 55 million years ago, Germany was actually a tropical rainforest, and these little miniature horse relatives were living in these lush tropical rainforests. And when we're looking at the fossils, if you look at the picture of animals like Hyracotherium, you'll notice that they don't bear that much resemblance to a horse. The most obvious feature of modern horses, and what's unusual about them compared to any other mammal, is they've actually only got one toe. Horses actually walk on one digit. Okay, their nails are attached to the bottom, and they're literally walking around on one digit. They evolved from animals like you and me that had more digits, and Hyracotherium actually has 4 digits, 4 toes. Okay, but as horses evolved, the number of toes reduced. In other species you'll see with like Merycohippus and things like that have 3, and eventually getting down to the 1. Another thing that we can notice from their skulls get much larger, longer, the teeth get bigger, and these are all adaptations to feeding on grass. So when the earliest horses were around, they're living in tropical forests, they were eating leaves and fruits, softer kind of foods to eat. They didn't need the big powerful jaws and big flat teeth to grind that food. They also maybe were hiding away from predators, so they didn't need to run very fast. They were living on softer ground too, maybe a bit more muddy and boggy in forests. So those 4 toes would have given it a larger surface area to help it stop it sinking into the mud. But over the course of the last sort of 60 million years, the Earth's climate has changed quite a lot. It's got progressively colder, and as a result it's gotten drier. So these tropical rainforests that covered big parts of the Earth in the past started to diminish, and forests in general started to shrink. And we started seeing the development of big open grasslands. Now, if you're a small little animal that used to rely on hiding from your predators, you've lost your cover. You're now out in the open. Predators can see you, they can go straight for you. So individuals that were better adapted at running away from their prey were the ones that would survive and reproduce, and they'd pass on those alleles to those offspring. So this is what we see with their toes. The loss of toes reduced the surface area in contact with the ground, which meant less friction. They can move faster, run faster over harder ground. And obviously with the replacement of their fruits and leaves that they're eating with grass, which is much harder to process and chew, they needed much bigger jaws and teeth to do that. I've also included in this PowerPoint as well the evolution of the whales, and you'll see actually the earliest whale ancestors were again mammals like you and me, and they were living on land. So we've actually gone from an animal that had 4 legs, spent most of its time or a lot of its time on land, maybe kind of switching between land and water, to evolving into these fully aquatic mammals that in fact modern whales and dolphins have no back legs at all. How they propel themselves through the water with their fluke is their tail, highly modified tail. The back legs are completely gone and the pelvis is really reduced. To help them breathe underwater as well, their nostrils have moved from the end of their snout, like you see like a dog-like snout with the nostrils on the end, actually migrating to the top of the head to give them a blowhole, so they can very easily come up to the surface and breathe without having to lift up the whole face out of the water. All our adaptations to help them in the water. Their limbs have changed into big flippers to help them paddle and push their way through the water, opposed to having fingers and claws and things to help grip the ground. So massive changes. And because we've got such a good fossil record of both the horse and the whale, it does provide us with really strong evidence for this process of evolution and species, how they change through time. The last little bit I want to sort of briefly touch on is actually how the fossil record shows us that not all species have changed. Some have actually remained fairly static. So you may or may not have heard of this term living fossil. I don't particularly like this term because it's not 100% accurate. But actually if we look at certain modern species alive today, things like sharks, crocodiles, plants like ginkgo, if you've ever heard of ginkgo, cycads, things like that is another type of plant. And we look at their fossil relatives, look in the fossil record, we actually see that a lot of these organisms have remained fairly unchanged through time. Your basic shark body plan has existed for a very long time. And I've seen fossil leaves of ginkgo trees that look identical to modern relatives, and they might be 200 million years separating them, but they appear not to have changed. What this shows us is that some species are well adapted, so well adapted that they don't need to change their body plans as much. So they might go against the idea of evolution, but actually they do sort of support it in their own way, because they show that these organisms have adapted to such a particular degree that works for them, that they're able to remain stable through time. So it's a different kind of sort of selection going on there to remain the same. And that's pretty much it. So, you know, as you go through this lesson, these PowerPoints, make sure that, number one, you know what a fossil is and how they form. Number two, how fossils can be used as evidence for evolution, and the example of the horses and the whales, and, you know, the idea that, you know, some species haven't changed and they've remained the same. So this is old Dr. P signing off for your second lesson. Have a good one. Cheers.